Tim, I am so delighted that you're here with us today. You and I have been friends for about 14 years now. And actually, people won't know, but you were one of my early mentors in the sector. And I have so much respect for you and all that you've achieved. For the listeners that don't know you, and I'm sure there isn't that many actually, because you are a well-known character within disability sport and sport in general. Just tell us a bit about yourself and your background and not necessarily sport, but also how life has shaped you to get into doing what you're doing.
Thanks, Alaina. And first of all, I want to thank you and BBS for the 50 years that you've been involved, but also for inviting me along because I've been around for the majority of those 50 years, not all of them. And the reason not all of them is because I'm an urban street kid from Nottingham. I was premature born, dysfunctional family, eldest of 5 children. You would not want to have lived next door to us because we were quite rowdy. At one stage, there was 8 of us in the house in a 3-bedroom semi-detached council house. So it could be chaotic at times, and my mum wasn't at home or my dad wasn't at home for various reasons, and sometimes both of them weren't. I had this sort of resilience and mental toughness being developed, part of my early evolution and environment, and I love my brothers and sisters and my family, and being an urban street kid, because the one thing that we all had in common was we loved to play and we
Yeah.
loved to be involved in the local community. And the one thing that connected us all, and even to this day, when we look back and I talk to some of my old school friends, that is sport. So that was
Yeah.
the one thing that helped me in my early life was sport gave me that release. And sport can come in different guises. Nowadays, we get sometimes hung up on the sport. We think it's too elitist or too professional or too hard. It's not. It's just about having fun. And that's how I started.
Mm.
So sport has been that key strand for me in all my life.
It's interesting. You just talked about sport being a release for you, and you've intimated that you were the eldest of 5 in quite a chaotic household. So you would have had an awful lot of responsibility then, and that ability to just go and play out and run off steam, which is an expression that we often use for kids. Go run off your energy. I'm sure that was something that was really quite important to you.
It was. We did everything. We went and played in the woods. We'd invent races and all sorts. And as a family, although there was 13 years between me and my youngest sister, we did everything together. Because as the oldest, it was down to me. I took on the responsibility, I suppose, to protect my brothers and sisters a little bit. And one of my brothers also had my eye condition, became an international athlete as well. So that those early beginnings and those humble beginnings of just inventing games and then playing cricket, football, you name it on the local field, it shaped us. It shaped us to be what we are and gave us discipline and it gave us fun and it gave us an opportunity to engage with others that we probably wouldn't have had because not many people wanted to engage with us because we were this dysfunctional family.
And talking about that and that fun and stuff, I know from what you and I have spoke about in the past that your sight condition wasn't actually diagnosed until much later on in life. So tell us a little bit about that and how that impacted on your life just generally when you were younger and 2, sort of post-diagnosis.
So when I was younger at school, I was probably vision impaired and didn't know it. I wore spectacles and it was the good
Right.
old fashioned national health wire rim things that those can go back and know well back was the Milky Bar Kid stuff. So for me, I didn't know any different. And so we just grew up and then I left school as soon as I could because I had to help bring money into the family. So we just got on with our lives. I rode a motorbike. When I was about 30 years of age, we found out there was a genetic hereditary eye condition in the family that nobody knew about. So I didn't get diagnosed until I was age 31. It was on my 31st birthday. They said, yes, Mr. Reddish, you have retinitis pigmentosa. No, there isn't a
Mhm.
cure. There's nothing we can do about it. Goodbye. It was very rare then.
Yeah, that must have been very impactful. And you mentioned about a couple of your siblings there. I know that your brother had the condition as well. Was it just the 2 of you or 5 of you?
Me and my brother Tony, we both had it. My other brother didn't. And my 2
Right.
sisters were carriers. But in those days, you didn't have blood tests or anything to identify that it was X-linked. So we had to deal with all
Yeah.
that. I'd got 2 young children. I'd got a reasonably steady job and all that type of stuff. And then this hits you. And it was a bit of a blow. It was a bit of a challenge.
Yes. And you'd already had quite a lot of challenges in your life. And then this was a new challenge that when you get a condition like RP, I should imagine that you feel that it's not something you can control and you had to really bring that resilience into to play again?
Yeah, and you're right. You have no control. But the only thing I was told was, well, it might stabilise. You might keep what you've got and whatever. So it's that year on year of not knowing whether it is going to go. And the best thing that ever happened to me was I went blind. But that's it. There's no more regression. It's gone. When you've got no functional vision, you've got no functional vision. And to be honest, it was the best thing that happened to me because I didn't have to worry about anything else, whether I'd lose any more, whether I had to adapt anymore. Because the challenge was you didn't just adapt in your job, because I was in a job that was in the non-disability community and things. And also I had to adapt on how I was going to live and function. And that was happening literally every 6 months. Something seemed to get worse. So that was it. But fortunately, I got that background I had, and it gave me that mental resilience, that toughness.
Mhm.
And the good thing was I had great family around me, even my brothers and sisters. Although we still argue like cat and dog, we're still the best of friends.
Yeah, that is sibling rivalry in every way. I live that life myself. So,
Good.
Tim, you are a very decorated Paralympian. How did, the role of sport suddenly come to the fore at that sort of pivotal time in your life?
So I was actually, at the time, I was a leisure facility manager. My job was sport as well. So it wasn't just that. I'd been a swimming teacher. I'd been a coach. Well, I was still coaching at the time. So,
Okay.
and then I went into facility management and I was still teaching and coaching. From that point of view, sport was part of my life. It wasn't just a hobby. It was my job. It was everything. So
Yeah.
for me, it was, well, what do I do? I'm hunter warrior is old school, I know, but I've got a job. I've got 2 children. I'm married. How are we going to manage if I go blind, if I can't do this job anymore and that? So
Yeah.
sport kept me focused. What sport can do, and I use the term sport in a wider context in this occasion, it's all about physical activity and fun. It's not just about that high performance. I never knew I was going to be a high performing athlete at the time. So sport gave me the comfort zone. I went
Yeah.
back to what I loved and what I could do. So it gave a new meaning to me. So I went back to sport. It gave me structure. It
Yeah.
gave me self-belief. And
Mhm.
once you've got that self-belief back, you then gain confidence in everything you do. Sport enabled me to get on with my life because through sport and then getting involved with British Blind Sport in those days and their swim program, it meant that I had to travel, and I had to travel with a white cane. And I was terrified of doing it in the early days. But if it hadn't been for sport, I might have been cocooned. But because I needed to get to a certain place by a certain time
Mhm.
on a white cane on my own, it made me do it. So it helped me get that self belief. So if sport hadn't been there, I could have quite easily become more insular than what I was at the time.
And do you think that when you were doing that sport, meeting other people with sight loss who were also participating in the sport, I mean, one of the things I hear from some of our members, particularly actually when parents bring young people or young children to our events, is we didn't know anybody else with this condition. We didn't know anybody else who's going through what our child is going through, or even themselves, a bit I've gone through. And actually, sport often can bring people together. It becomes quite a leveler, doesn't it? Although there are levels of sport from grassroots to elite, it, it in itself can be a real leveler for people to be cohesive and make friends.
It does a lot of things. It's hard to narrate it sometimes, and it's very difficult to just put it down in a report or a submission for something. But what sport does, it's the platform that enables you to be you. So then when you participate and engage with like-minded people, it enables you to forget about the fact that you might be losing your sight. Forget about the sight that you've lost. You can have meaningful engagement and conversation with individuals that are around you through the sporting environment that you're not embarrassed to have a discussion about, or you can take the proverbial on each other and it's not an issue. You've not got to worry about somebody going, well, that's not politically correct because that's not right to say that. But between
Yeah.
ourselves as visually impaired and blind people, we do take the mickey. And sometimes we're not very politically correct. I know that. But that's how we deal with it. But we are laughing with each other. We're not laughing
Yeah.
at each other and we're not being negative towards each other and we're not being dismissive of our impairment. It's just the way we deal with it and the way we handle it. But if we didn't have that platform of sport and physical activity, I don't know where we'd go. But it might be the same if somebody's involved in dance or drum. whatever your community is, you need to find a community that gives you the release and the
Yeah.
opportunity. And sport does that.
And I think as well from what you were just saying, and I was just thinking, I was interviewing a couple of our Paralympic judo players a couple of weeks ago, and there's that kind of camaraderie and jostling with each other and having a laugh because ultimately, when you're participating and you're competing, you've got each other's back, you're supporting one another, and you are a team player. And sport really brings out the best in people, doesn't it?
It does. And for me, I was involved in an individual sport, a bit like judo. And the only time we
Hmm.
had teams was relays. Mine was swimming. What happened was when I got involved with British Blind Sport and swimming, I found a colleague and somebody that was there with me, for me, and we were there for each other. We ended up being our main rivals. We both competed in the same classification and also a lot of the time in the same swimming events. We ended up being probably best friends as well because of it. And we helped each other along that journey because he was losing his vision and he's lost his vision from an early age. And that was Chris Holmes.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Ah,
I've got a
yes.
lot of time for Chris. He's a good guy. So, talking about people within the sport and not just this sport, because Tim, what we haven't covered is that your role has gone from being Paralympic swimmer and successful Paralympic swimmer, achieving great kudos and medals at numerous games. You've actually then gone on to become the chair of the British Paralympic Association at what I must say was possibly the most pivotal time in this country, at least for Paralympic sport. Do you want to just share a little bit of that? Because you've been a bit modest here. So just tell the rest of the world what you did and how you did it.
Well, yeah, and I know I'm smart, but it's about believing in yourself and doing what you think is right. So I need to give you a little bit of history as well to help shape this. So when I was
Okay.
losing my sight, I was a coach. I was involved in local swimming association, everything. So I did what any person would do is I contacted British Swimming and said,
Mhm.
hello, I'm losing my sight because one of my friends who I coach has told me about Paralympic swimming, etc., etc. I knew about it, but not that detailed. And I said, I'm interested. And they turned and told me, we don't do disability. I said, what do you mean you don't do disability? Well, we do this thing called a assistant teachers award for swimming. I says, well, why don't you do it? So we got into a bit of an argument, as we do. And I put the phone down and I turned around and said to my wife, Val, I says, that will change. And whether they like it or not, I'm going to get involved and make it change. So that was the
Wow.
catalyst for me to do something because I believed that British Swimming and Swim England, as it's called now, and everything, and all the other governing bodies should be involved. They may not have the skills and expertise to do everything, but they should be involved because they have the expertise in the sport. They used to say to me,
Yes.
we don't know how to coach disability. I says, I don't need you to coach disability because I'm damn good at that. I'm blind. I'm disabled. I don't need any coaching in being disabled. I just need coaching in swimming. So that was my sort of like philosophy around getting involved. So with the BPA, the British Paralympic Association, GB, I started off on the Athletes Council as I did with swimming as well. It was getting involved to help shape the future, to hear what's happening on the ground and on an everyday basis. I was on the board of the BPA and I was asked by a lot of members if I would consider becoming the chairman. And I thought about it and I'd done some international roles with International Paralympic Swimming, et cetera, et cetera. So I said, okay, I will. And I took on that role. I did get elected, which I always thank the membership for. And it was during the cycle of London 2012. And that gave us a lot of opportunity to grow as the BPA to help us establish where we are now. And I'm ever grateful to those chairs that were there before me, because without them, the BPA wouldn't have been established. So for me, it was just an opportunity to help shape the future. For example, my first games, because of where Paralympic sport was, and this I'm talking 1992, all the participants had to find funding to go to the Paralympic Games. And that started to change come 96, but we still had to help raise money. And then 2000, it started to change again and then again. And London 2012 was a catalyst for change, for opening everybody's eyes, not just in the UK, but globally. People's eyes were opened because we were on an equal footing by the organising committee. Some people may disagree with elements of that, but the generic approach and the overall approach was that we were on an equal footing by the organising committee. And that's had its challenges. And I was fortunate to be around the table to help shape that and put the case forward contrary to what opinions people might say about me, I was quite diplomatic at times.
Just going back there, Tim, that's quite important because when any of the listeners listening in and think raising the money for you to get yourselves to the games, well, you're the athletes, so why shouldn't you? You've got to take a step back. And I can't talk for other disability groups, but I do know that 3 out of 4 blind or partially sighted people are unlikely to be in work. So you've got that additional financial pressure of situations like that. So when the likes of UK Sport acknowledge and recognise and say, right, okay, we are going to help fund you, that then opens the door for more disabled people to be able to participate at an elite level, doesn't it?
It takes an element out of your preparation, your everyday awareness, because you're going to remember is for some people with an impairment is we have to adapt every day. As soon as we take a foot outside of our front door, just going up my own street, just going up the street changes on a daily basis because we don't know which vehicle may be parked on the road or may not be parked on the road. Some vehicles' mirrors stay in, some don't. It might be bin day. So every day you step out the door is different. We have to adapt
Yeah.
daily, sometimes hourly, sometimes by the minute. So for us, having to do all that and then have to think about, I want to go to the Paralympic Games. I want to create. And notice this was the same in the early days. It was no different for us when we were at British Blind Sport working with the swim program, when we wanted to compete overseas. We had to go out and generate funds because, let's be honest, it's nobody's fault. It wasn't British Blind Sport's faults in those days because they were quite an obscure
Yeah.
provider and facilitator for blind people in sport.
Yeah. And just you talked about adaptations there and your daily adaptations for blind and partially sighted people, which we hear it, and not just for people with sight loss, but people perhaps in wheelchairs or with CP, even people parking on the pavement. I mean, Chris Holmes, you talked about him a minute ago. I know he's a real fighter for making the streets more. But going on to adaptations and some really positive adaptations, and back to the role at the 2012. There were some things that were fundamentally done at those games, which I understand were the first to be done.
The template that London 2012 adopted was that we need to look at what we need to deliver at the Paralympic Games and then work backward for the Olympic Games so that the transition from the Olympic Games to the Paralympic Games was easier so that we don't have to rebuild something or take something down. We might have to
Yeah.
change something, but that transition was different. That was the focus from the Paralympic Games point of view. And that made a huge difference. And that template was adopted by France in Paris at the recent games and other organisations. So that was a catalyst. And also what London 2012 did that nobody else did in the past was allow individuals with a disability stroke impairment to be volunteers and also somebody that required advocate, support, assistant, guide were able to be supportive of that volunteer, but the volunteer was the primary focus of the organising committee. So when volunteers came in for training, etc., it was a volunteer they trained. They trained the assistant to assist the volunteer, not to
Yeah.
take over. And that was the little things like that behind the scenes that people may take for granted now. There was so much done off the field of play for London 2012 that nobody will ever know about. And rightly so, because that's what makes it a great games. And that's what a lot of organisations now will learn from that role and that approach that London. And guess who was the director of Paralympic integration at London 2012?
Who was that, man?
A certain person called Chris Holmes. And maybe he was sharing a room together when we were competing in Barcelona against each other, and we shared a room together. So we were good mates, we were rivals. Maybe we rubbed some influences off each other.
I think the other thing is, and I'll use this term quite lightly, from what I know of both of you, you're quite bloody minded when it comes to this is the way it should be and we're going to get through it and we'll jump over these hurdles. And actually, you couldn't have two better people to actually be making a huge difference.
No, I agree. But one thing I would like to emphasise is we were pushing on an open door with London 2012, with Lord Coe and Paul Dayton and the board and all the senior staff at London 2012. It was an open door. It wasn't a hard push for us.
Good.
They may not have agreed with us, but it wasn't a hard push.
Just from my memories, and I'll come on to your proudest or that most defining moment from the games, but just to share for those that are listening, there's just a couple of things. I was on the committee for making the games accessible. And you're right, there's a lot that goes on in the background about how to make it accessible for spectators. And we were really trying to ensure inclusion was in there for all spectators, be they in a wheelchair, be they deaf, be they have somebody with a guide dog, even things like where we're going to have the areas for the dogs, where we're going to make sure there's water for the dogs, all those sorts of things. We know that those nuances that perhaps hadn't been considered before were really taken into account. And then there was you as the chair and Tim Hollingsworth as the CEO of London 2012, who were the driving forces. And you possibly don't remember this, but I was quite new to the game at that point. I'd only been around for just under a year. So I was still finding my feet in disability sport. And I went to a BPA members meeting, and it was the last meeting before the games. And you said, and this was a defining moment for me, you said, we are going to sprinkle magic, and we need to sprinkle that magic. And that magic dust needs to stay post the games. I don't know if you remember saying that, but I think we were all, you couldn't hear a pin drop in the room because we knew what we had ahead of us was exciting. But I don't think any of us could comprehend just how pivotal those games were, not just for the UK, but across the world.
It was a magical experience for me. I learned a lot as an individual from the people in the boardroom. There were some great people in that boardroom that I sat with and learned from. So it enabled me to help shape and develop the British Paralympic Association over the 4-year cycle afterwards, to then hand on to Nick Webber, who's currently just retired as the chairman of the BPA. So for me, it was great. But we've got to remember this, there was a lot of great partners. The sponsors, every single one of them wanted to do something. They all were desperate to help. They loved the Olympic Games, and they probably got involved initially because of the Olympic Games, because they were sponsors and partners. But then they understood what the Paralympic movement can do and what the Paralympic Games can do, not just in the UK. And the final thing that came on, and I'm going to be honest, I got a lot of stick from our membership when Channel 4 were named as the host broadcaster. My inbox went ballistic because I was on the board and I was there that said, yes, we should appoint Channel 4 and not the BBC as the host broadcaster for London 2012. And I did get some, I must admit, I did sit there thinking, oh dear, I've upset everybody. What have I done? It wasn't just my decision, but I was party to it. So,
Yeah.
and look what Channel 4's done. We are the envy of the world. I can tell you that now. We are the envy of the world.
Yeah, I know. And a lot of that is down to, like you say, that open door, like Channel 4 listened and, okay, we'll embrace this. Just,
Sorry, I just want to fact something now, right? And the person that was driving it from commercial marketing and everything else at Channel 4 was a great gentleman called Dan Brook.
yeah,
Guess what his new role is as
I
a
believe
volunteer?
I believe he might be the new chairman of the BPA. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
I've
So,
yet to meet him. I'm looking
yeah,
forward to that moment.
so you see again, it's all these little things that you look past historically. There are key people, no, not key people. There are people that have been involved and are involved for years, and they all have connectivity, and they all stay around because of the power of the Paralympic movement, the Paralympic family. Well, I'm going to say parasport because Paralympic
Sport.
is about the games. It's about the
Yeah.
parasport family and the parasport, the community. We are a family. We are a community. We will argue and we will disagree, but don't you disagree with us collectively because we'll come out as a whole and as a family.
Yeah. And it is a movement and it is a family. Just a couple of more things, Tim. Firstly, you've had such a breadth of a career. What has been your proudest moment for yourself? But in terms of the advancements in disability sport over the years, and we've just talked about that a little bit with the para, what has been a moment that you've sat back and gone, yep, I can see we've taken massive strides forward? And it might be the games. There's two questions there. What's worked for you and what's worked for the movement as a whole on a bigger scale?
I think what's worked for me is that it enabled the parasport at the time, because I didn't know when I started that I'd be a Paralympian. You don't set
Yeah,
out
of
to be a
course.
Paralympian. Well, you shouldn't do. You set out to be the best you can be, whatever you do, whether that's sport, work, business, school, education. So I set out to be the best I could be. I did end up becoming a Paralympian and with some success. But for me, what stands out is how the movement's grown, because there are more and more people like me now, both Paralympians, both para-athletes and non-disabled coaches that are advocates for parasport. So for
Mhm.
me, that's the catalyst. But I want to give two. One, walking out in Barcelona, actually, and I was standing next to Chris Holmes at the time. Again, you see, there's a lot of things here. Best mate, roommate, paraded out together, was a fantastic experience. Not knowing
Mhm.
whether I'd win medals or not. I did win medals, but for me, it was that experience of walking out, representing my country, etc., etc. So for me, it was a fantastic experience. Never forget it. But two quick stories that embed why I believe that sport, physical activity for people with disabilities is important in life, in society, in your education, and in your development. London 2012, well, no, I'll go back. China, 2008, Beijing Paralympic Games. I was the chairman of the IPC Swimming Sport Committee. So I was responsible for making sure those games were delivered from a swimming perspective. The head of the Chinese delegation came to me and says, Mr. Tim, we'd like to have a meeting. I thought, oh God, what have we done? Check with the officials. We just disqualified a Chinese swimmer. Anyway, I had this meeting. They said, Mr. Tim, we would like you to meet Sun Yang. So Val was with me, my wife and guide, and she said, half bow, please, because it's all about the etiquette in China and Japan and Asia.
China.
Yeah. So she whispered in my ear what bow to do. So I did the bow, I gave him my business card, etc., etc. And this guy was 16 years of age. We shook hands. He was competing for China and he was breaking records over the place. He swam far quicker than I ever did, totally blind. He wanted to meet me. And I said, why?
Oh,
I said, why? He said, when the games were announced for Beijing, I was 9 years of age in an
yeah,
institution because he's blind. He's
yeah,
institutionalized in an education system. He said, and the games came along and I got selected for swimming. So it gave me, he says, but what also has given me belief and confidence is that he said, I've been able to look at you as a blind person and what you've done, and it gives me hope, faith, and opportunity for the future. Now, you can't buy that. I'm quite modest. I don't tell this story very often because I don't need to, but it's important that people hear this type of thing because of the power of parasport Paralympic Games. So that was a defining moment. And
mhm,
4 years later, not long before London 2012
yeah,
starts, I'm coming through my gym reception area because I've been for a swim, as I do, I still swim. And I hears this young girl going, hey, mister, yes, that's Mandeville. She says, what's Mandeville? That's Mandeville on your rucksack. Oh, it is Mandeville. Do you know about Mandeville? Of course I know about Mandeville. I know about everything to do with the Olympic and Paralympic Games because I'm on my Olympic and Paralympic sport committee at my school. This is a 7-year-old kid. She might not have been so 6, 7, telling me all about Mandeville, everything to
yeah.
do with the Olympic Games and the Paralympic Games. And I just was amazed. And I said, shall I tell you something? This is what I says. Well, I actually used to swim at the Paralympic Games and I'm still involved. How can we have a chat? So we sat and have a chat and she said, will you come to my school and tell all my Olympic and Paralympic committee and all my school all about it? I said, yes. So those are just two defining moments. And if you notice,
It's amazing.
I don't talk much about the field of play because the field of play is done and dusted. That
Yeah,
that has an impact on me. But the other things I talk about has an impact on the world and on
and
the
others. Yeah.
community that we live in. That's the key for me. What impact can we have on the community we live in rather than the impact on me? That's why I've got involved for years. That's why I'm still a volunteer. That's why I still do the things I do. And that's why I'm still an agitator.
And that's why it's still very passionate, which is definitely coming across.
Yeah.
Tim, we've talked a lot there about parasport, and British blind sport isn't parasport, it is grassroots. But we know that the more we open up the opportunities, the more that we're potentially going to have Paralympians. And that's not what it's about, because for every single Paralympian, let's say it's a Paralympic swimmer, doesn't matter which sport, I'd like to think there's 1,000 people actually enjoying swimming, for example. But you've been a great supporter of British blind sport over the years. Do you have any particular highlights of your involvement with us?
First and foremost, I will be eternally grateful to British Blind Sport and their swimming program, but not just swimming, that their other sports. They gave me the opportunity to flourish in
Good.
what I do. All right. If British Blind Sport weren't around then, I don't know what would have happened. I probably wouldn't have, because there was nobody else doing it. So for me, they were a catalyst, and they should still be a catalyst to facilitate opportunities. British
Mm,
Blind Sport can't do everything. You know that. I know that. We've got to be realistic, but we should be optimistic. So for
yeah.
me, British Blind Sport have the opportunity to grow and develop in an environment that is very challenging. But the highlights are that, one, they gave me the opportunity to participate. First and foremost, just as a swimmer in a program, never
Yeah.
mind the competitive side. Two, it helped me engage and grow as an individual and meet like-minded people. That's important. When you're in an impairment world, it's important to meet like-minded people. And thirdly, it others to develop. But when you look at it, I got the opportunity to compete at my first major international swimming championships, which were the International Blind Sports Association Pan Sport Games in Zurich, Switzerland in 1989. That was my very,
Yeah.
and that gave me the catalyst to go away and say, I need to do more to get better. If that hadn't have happened,
Momentum. Yeah.
it's unlikely I'd have gone to Barcelona as an athlete, because if that hadn't have happened, I think, but it's how things are. But not just that, it's how other sports have grown from those humble beginnings. And some of them are now
Yeah.
national federations of their own, which is good,
Yeah.
because if British Blind Sport hadn't supported that development in the early days, they wouldn't be able to then branch away and become their own national federation. And that's important to understand how things develop and grow and evolve. And British
That's
Blind
right.
Sport will still have a major part to play in that area. That's my belief.
Well, that's a really, really good example, actually, because I know your brother, God bless his soul, he was very involved in goalball, which BBS sort of introduced to this country. And now as it, with through our support, and now obviously the great work that the likes of Mark, who's their CEO, is doing now, and Mike before him, became in 2012 a national governing body in its own right and has gone on to really flourish. But we are doing exactly the same again with Showdown at this moment in time. We've introduced it. We've now got 7 or 8 clubs rolling out. We just held the UK Showdown Championships recently. However, we are also working with the UK Showdown to help them get their policies and procedures and governance in place. So at some point we can hand it over to them, because we don't want to own sport. We want to support sport. And that's a lot of what we do in the background.
It's important. It's important because we all should identify what our strengths are, but
Yep.
not be afraid if there are others that can take on areas that we have either been involved in, or natural evolution produces opportunities that grow. We all know that. As a swimmer, as an athlete, I had to change coaches at different times through my career. I had to go and identify different types of coaches for strength and conditioning in the different
Mm,
evolution of my career. And that should happen at different stages. Not every governing body, national governing body, can deliver everything they need to deliver. And sometimes we, as end users, get frustrated with those national governing bodies because we believe they should do more, and they probably should in a case. But where do they go to get that support and that opportunity to guide them? And we shouldn't be afraid to learn from each other. That's what
yeah.
I learned when I was at London 2012 and at the British Paralympic Association, is that the best coaches in the world plagiarize what works well.
Yeah. Just talking about that, and I'm very conscious we haven't got an awful lot of time left. I've got a couple of questions. What people may not know is that you actually coach swimming. So just out of interest, explain how you do that. Because when you explained it to me, I was like, wow, that's clever.
Because I was sighted with enough sight in the early days, I was able to see certain things. So I could see technical techniques, etc., etc. So I had that inherent base. But I used to be a sports development officer. I used to look at inclusion opportunities, and I'm talking in the days when nobody else was doing it. I'm talking 1990. Okay, so I had the opportunity to go. So I adapted my style and my recognition. So when I was working as performance director for British Swimming for the Paralympic program, I knew every athlete on the program by the sound of their strokes. every
Wow.
single athlete, right? So I could tell you which athlete was in the water at the time when they passed me, or I listened to what they were doing. But I learned how to do different things different ways. So you adapt your style and technique. So I have to be more descriptive, but also I would have aids to help me. You can buy these things called an artist doll, which is a bit like a toy Ken or Barbie, but you can
Yeah.
bend and twist it into almost any
Yeah.
human movement. So I was able to
Yeah.
use that to be able to demonstrate to a visually impaired and blind swimmers how I would like them to put their arm in a certain position and things. So I just adapted it. And what I did do, I became very, very analytical using data to help me. I use modern things to help us get the best out of an individual. And one thing I always say to any individual I work with, whether that's in business, because I do mentoring and things, and many of these discussions, is to effect
Yeah.
change and to be the best you can have is anything between 90 and 95% psychological, not physiological. So
Yeah.
let's get your head around it first. That's the
Yeah.
key.
That is
Get
good.
your head around it. Find a way to get your head around it. And I think that going back full circle, the upbringing I had, the environment I grew up in, the mental toughness, the resilience from being premature born. Most people died, most babies died in 1957, it was, when being
Yeah.
premature born under 2 pounds. So
Mm.
that was help. I think it goes full circle. It's about that toughness and resilience and having great people around you.
We have nearly come full circle. So
Yeah.
I hope that we've been able to give or you have been able to provide some insight into what a great athlete you are, but what a great influencer you've been in disability sport. And just even you was using your coaching as an example, you have found ways to listen, to learn, to take in so that nothing is a barrier for you. And honestly, it's been a fantastic interview and I could talk to you for hours. You
Well,
often do that because we're celebrating our 50th year and you have had a lot of insight and a lot of experience with BBS. And just be interesting to say, what are your hopes for us as an organization going forward?
I think what for you guys as an organization, I think it's important that when you meet with your trustees, your board, and your membership, you look to the future and try and find a way of mapping out anything up to 10 years. We get hung up on a 4-year strategy or a 5-year strategy. I
Yeah.
think it's important now to look a bit further and look at what your strengths are, where you can establish partnerships and partnership delivery, because you can't do it all your own. But I think the
No.
biggest key here is that what you've been good at over the years and where I think there's some great opportunities is how can you become an even better influencer slash facilitator that empowers others to either participate or deliver.
Deliver. That is exactly what we try to do. I always say we are conduit for sport. We are not the deliverers of it. We work with the sight loss sector and make them aware of opportunities. And we work with the sports sector to help them get the expertise. Going back to what you said earlier, you don't need somebody to teach you how to be a blind man. You need to teach them about the sport. We have the expertise around sight loss and
Yeah.
together we could make some really good fundamental change. I hope you and I once had a conversation, should there really be national disability sports organisations? And I hope one day that we do such a good job that we're not needed, but we've got a long way to go yet.
Yeah, we have. But I think what we have to remember is that first and foremost, it took British Blind Sport to establish the credibility
Yeah.
to be able to go in and poke the stick when it's required in that national federation sector, because we still have to poke the stick occasionally.
And that's why I have people like my favourite agitator on this call right now, because you help poke the stick very well. And thank God for the likes of you. Tim, thank you so much for your time. As usual, you have been one of my mentors and will continue to be. And I know if I don't know the answer to anything in sport, I always say, I'll just give Tim a call. And you seem to know everybody as well as give me some really sage advice.
I thank you for that, but also remember that we've been on this journey together and we all learn from each other, because I still learn from you and British Blind Sport and a lot of your colleagues and partners. So I think it's important that we never forget about learning from each other.
Learning from each other. What a lovely note to end on. Tim, thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.